just to summarize, the chapter is dealing with a Kohen and a king that make their own inadvertent mistake. So what happens to them? So they have to bring a different sacrifice. This is pretty explicit in, I believe, the 4th chapter of Vayikra about what happens. So the Mishnah talked about that. What if the Kohen Gadol, he issues a ruling and then acts erroneously off of his ruling? Then he's liable to bring an offering. However, if there's any advertence, and if there's any piece of advertence, whether he ruled advertently or he ruled inadvertently, but he acted advertently, then he's not going to bring a sacrifice. So, and the Mishnah explained, because he's compared to the great court, the same way the great court brings a sacrifice only when they rule erroneously and the people act erroneously. So the Kohen Gadol is the same way. He has to rule erroneously and he has to act erroneously. He needs both of those factors. The Gemara asked what the source is, and the Gemara answered la'ashmas ha'am, that we're comparing him to the congregation. So the last 3 words of 6b, going on to 7, which is just the beginning of a long section, so we'll just start from there. The halo dinhu, the Gemara says that we usually only need verses when we can't derive it out of logic. But if you have logic to tell you something, so then you don't need the verses. So the Gemara says, the halo dinhu, this is logical. Why? And then we're going to wait till the end to figure out what is the verse really doing for us. So says the Gemara, let's see. We have an individual who, Jules, good morning. We're on the first line of 7a. So we have a general, inadvertent sin offering that a person brings. Says the Gemara, though, there are some exceptions to the rule, and let's compare the exceptions to each other. Tzibur mutza michlal yachid, a congregation, so they have different rules than an individual. Individual will bring a female, a she-goat or a she-sheep, an ewe, and a tzibur, a congregation, will bring a bull. Umashiach also motzi michlal mashuach, sorry. The Kohen Gadol, it's called the Anointed One. He's also excluded. Mashiach motzi michlal yachid is different than an individual. So they're both different. He also has to bring a different offering. He brings a bull. So both the congregation and the Kohen Gadol are both different in terms of what animal they bring. And now, so the first suggestion is, just like a congregation has to bring an offering, and that offering is different for their inadvertent sin, and they only bring it when it came after an erroneous ruling of the court. The other exception to the rule, the Kohen Gadol, he also has to bring a different offering, a bull, for his inadvertent act, as opposed to a she-goat or a female sheep. So he should, the same way it's an exception in that area, it should be an exception in terms of when he brings it. So he should also have to bring it only when it came after his own erroneous ruling. That's one form of logic. Oh, klach l'derech zu, go on a different path. Let's see. Nasi, literally prince, but here it means a king. He's also motzi michlal yachid. A nasi also brings a different sacrifice than a regular individual. He brings a male, a he-goat. He brings a he-goat for an inadvertent act. Regular person, you and I, would bring a female sheep or a female goat. So he's also excluded, meaning he's singled out. He has his own special rules. And yet, Umashiach motzim michlal yachid, and the Kohen Gadol, the Anointed One, is also an exception. He's singled. He has different rules than the individual. Ma nasi, maybe bishkagas maisa, below helam davar. When does a king have to bring something for an inadvertent act? Just when he does something inadvertently, like me and you. It's just that his animal is different. He brings a different animal. But there's no stipulation that the king has to first rule erroneously and then act upon his erroneous ruling. That it never says. So just like the king who brings a separate sin offering, different animal, a male goat, it's not preceded by any erroneous ruling. So manasi maybe b'shikas ma'isa below helem davar with no lapse in terms of his ruling. So maybe the Kohen Gadol should be the same as the king. Av Mashiach maybe b'shikas ma'isa below helem davar. Meaning, if you have a Kohen Gadol, who do you compare him to? You have, we'll call it, 99% of the Jewish people all bring female sin offerings for inadvertent acts. Then you have a king. He brings a male goat for an inadvertent act. Then you have a congregation that brings an animal for an inadvertent act, but that's followed by an erroneous ruling. And now you have a Kohen Gadol. So who do you compare it to? So he's not like everyone else. He brings a different animal. But is he like the congregation? Or is he like the king? So, says the Gemara, still going through logic. We don't need no verses. Nira lemidoma. Who's he more similar to? Tzibur bepar, the ein mevi and asham talui. Umashiach bepar, the ein mevi asham talui. So we know that another kind of sin offering is called an asham talui. Literally, they call it a guilt offering. Talui means hanging. So the classic case is you ate a piece of maybe prohibited fat, a suffix, doubtful prohibited fat. So it's hanging in the balance, so to speak. You shouldn't have done it, but you did it. Maybe you didn't know. You thought it was regular, and then you realize, oh my gosh, this might be forbidden fat. But because we don't know what it is, you bring a special kind of sin offering called an asham talui. However, a congregation and a Kohen Gadol both don't bring that. So you see, he's more similar to a congregation than to a king. So matzi v'inachayv ela helam davar im shigas ma'isa. So since we're comparing him to a congregation only will bring a sin offering when it's followed by an erroneous ruling. Af Mashiach lo yechayv ela helam davar im shigas ma'isa. So therefore, a Kohen Gadol will also only be liable for his inadvertent act if it's followed by an erroneous ruling. Yeah. Oh, klach l'derech zu, or maybe go a different way. Nasi maybe se'ira b'avodas kochavim. When it comes to inadvertent acts that are regarding idol worship, you do a certain form of bowing or whatever else inadvertently. So you bring a se'ira, you bring a female goat. Maybe asham vadai, and for sure you bring a definite guilt offering. Mashiach maybe se'ira b'avodas kochavim, maybe asham vadai, and the Kohen Gadol also brings a female goat when it comes to an inadvertent act regarding idol worship. Maybe asham vadai, and he also brings a definite guilt offering. So let's compare him to the king. Manasi maybe b'shikas ma'isa, af Mashiach maybe b'shikas ma'isa. Just like a king, a regular inadvertent act not followed by any ruling is liable. So to a Kohen Gadol should be liable even without any erroneous ruling. So on that, the Gemara says, Talmud Lomar la'ashmas ha'am. To that, we need a verse to teach you la'ashmas ha'am. Harehu Mashiach kitzibur, to compare the Kohen Gadol to the to the nation. Matzibur and maybe ela helam davar al shikas ma'isa. Just like a congregation will only bring a sacrifice for an inadvertent act when it's followed by an erroneous ruling of the court. Af Mashiach maybe ela halam davar im shikas ma'isa. So too the Kohen Gadol will only bring a sacrifice for his inadvertent aveira only when it's followed by an inadvertent ruling. Yeah. Okay. Now the Gemara says not so fast. Ema matziver horu v'asu acharav b'horu asu chayavin. If you're going to compare it to a congregation, so how far are we comparing it? Well, we know that a congregation, there the rules are that it's only when the court ruled erroneously and the congregation actually followed their ruling, not, following, but they actually followed through with it. So maybe Af Mashiach Yeshahora Maybe the Kohen Gadol, he needs that his ruling is followed by some people, just like a congregation. It's a ruling which is followed by the nation. So maybe the Kohen Gadol should be the same thing. And yet our Mishnah said the only person that needs to follow the Kohen Gadol's ruling to be liable is the Kohen Gadol himself. The Kohen Gadol does not need his fan club to follow his ruling in order to be liable for the inadvertent sacrifice, for the sacrifice that he's bringing for committing an inadvertent avera, inadvertently. So maybe that should be true. Talmud Lomar, the hikriv al chataso asher chata. He only brings it for chataso, his sin offering. Al masha chata hu mevi, the ein mevi al masha chata acher. He only brings for his sin offering. He does not have to bring for that which for that which others follow. Others following him is not a requirement. Yeah. Okay, now Amar Mar. Let's analyze this brisa. So all one long brisa. Amar Mar Mashiach beparva and maybe Asham Talui Minale. How do we know that a Kohen Gadol doesn't bring an Asham Talui? Asham Talui, once again, is something that's brought it's an inadvertent, you did an avera inadvertently, except it itself was in a state of doubt. We don't know what it is exactly, right? You picked up meat and you went to a friend's house, a non-Jew, and he prepared meat for you, kosher meat, not kosher meat, and you thought you had it clearly which one you took, and you came home and you really don't know. Meanwhile, your wife walks in and takes a bite. You forgot to tell her. So she now inadvertently ate something which itself is a doubt, assuming that there's no way to figure out exactly, its status. But so a Kohen Gadol does not bring that. How do we know? The ein maybe nasham talid v'chiper lava Kohen al shigagaso asher shagag. So it says that we're going to atone for the Kohen for the shigagaso asher shagag, for the inadvertent act that he committed. Misha chataso v'shigagaso shava. It's only someone whose sin and inadvertent act are the same. Yatsa Mashiach she'ein shigagaso v'chataso shava, excluding a Kohen Gadol whose shigagaso and chataso are not similar. Now, what does that mean? Dichsiv la'ashmas ha'am harehu Mashiach kitzibor. His own. One second. One second. Yeah. The Kohen Gadol, his inadvertent act is not exactly the same as everybody else's, because for him to bring a sacrifice when he committed something inadvertently, it has to be followed by his own erroneous ruling, because he's compared to a congregation which brings a sin offering only when followed by an erroneous ruling. So that's not the same as everybody else. Everybody else just brings an offering, in a normal circumstance when you committed something inadvertently. But he the Kohen Gadol, his, I guess the way it's called is his shigagaso v'chataso, his own inadvertence and his sin offering are not exactly the same. It has to be followed by an erroneous ruling. If you would do an act inadvertently, he doesn't necessarily bring an offering for that. So therefore, he'll be that's a exemption from an asham talud, since the verse says v'chiper lava Kohen al shagaso asher shagag. So it's only it has to be somebody who is equal in terms of when you do an avera inadvertently, you bring a sin offering. But the Kohen Gadol is not always like that, so therefore he's exempt from bringing this asham talui. Yeah. Okay, so now that we said all of this, and that this is the source, so basically the Gemara just read the pasuk by the Kohen that his sorry, not by the Kohen, the pasuk about a asham talui, this sin offering that's brought for someone which is in a state of doubt. It quoted that pasuk, and it said that pasuk only applies, that verse only applies to somebody who's when he does an avera, he brings a regular sin offering. That's coming to, who's that coming to exclude? It's coming to exclude a Kohen Gadol. So now that we've excluded a Kohen Gadol because of this verse, and we're showing that he's different. So now the Gemara is saying la'ashma sa'am al korkach lo ka'amrle ella asham kidei naspa. So 1 second. Now that we have this verse, so then you don't need the other verse that we started off with of la'ashma sa'am that compared him to the nation. 1 second. I don't know, how do they translate this last line? I think what the Gemara is saying, and you'll tell me if it says something different, but I think what the Gemara is saying is basically that this new verse that we just brought up that excluded the Kohen Gadol, so it's really not necessary, because our original verse of La'ashma Sa'am that compares the Kohen Gadol to a congregation, that itself already teaches us that it has the same rules as the congregation, which then we'll know already that just like a congregation doesn't bring a guilt, this Asham Talui, so too a Kohen Gadol is not going to bring the Asham Talui. So in essence, you don't need this other pasuk, Ella Asham Kedei Nas, but you're right, you don't need it. It's just brought here, meaning you don't need it to derive things from, but it's just bringing here to show you that he really is exempt from bringing this Asham Talui. Not that you need the verse to teach you that, because you know that already from the other verse, but it's just brought here to teach you, to just express to you the halacha. I think that's an accurate reading. If it says something different, you let me know. Okay, good. Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. Next mission. So now, Hora b'fnei atzmo v'asa b'fnei atzmo mischaper lo b'fnei atzmo. So now, it's a little bit like the Gemara is going to go get in more details what the case is exactly. Rashi, or whoever else is on the side of the Gemara, some say it's not Rashi because it's so long. Rashi always writes much more short. If you notice on the side of the Gemara, they're like super lengthy Rashi. So there are those who say it's not really Rashi. They bring an interesting proof that in 5 daf from now, he's going to quote a word from Old French, but it's not from Old French, it's from Latin. So some say Rashi didn't have Latin. Every time he quotes a different language, it's always Old French, not Latin. So they want to say it's a proof that it's really not Rashi. Either way, though, the Rashi or whoever tells us that right now we're talking about a case where the Kohen Gadol's Hora b'fnei atzmo, the Asa b'fnei atzmo, meaning he ruled for himself and he did something on his own. So mischaper lo b'fnei atzmo, he gets his own atonement. Now that's really obvious because that's just what the Torah tells you. You don't necessarily need a Mishnah for that per se. So the Gemara is going to say that really the Kohen Gadol is sitting there with the court, and they're each ruling different rulings. The court is ruling on, let's say, chelev, on forbidden fats, and he's ruling about Avodah Zora. So when he makes an erroneous ruling and acts upon it, he has to go atone for himself. He has to bring his own bull. So I guess we'll see more in detail what you would have thought. But they're both ruling, and they both ruled, and he atones for himself. Okay. Hore im hatzibur. Case number 2 is they're both ruling together on the same case. They're both ruling about forbidden fats. Not that the court's ruling about a forbidden fat and he's ruling about idol worship. Rather, they're both ruling about forbidden fats. Okay, now what happens? So, Horei Matzibur, Va'asei Matzibur. So he ruled erroneously with the court, and then he also acted with the rest of the nation. So the court sent out a kashrus notice that this is permitted, with the Kohen Gadol's name and the court's name on it. And then the Kohen Gadol went also to dinner that night. Yom Kippur was coming. He needed to relax a little bit. He had to go through a stressful period of time. So he went to go get dinner at the J. And he also, turns out that he also ate that forbidden fat. Okay. What's the halacha? Hori matzibur v'asei matzibur mischaper lo im hatzibur. He gets atonement with the congregation, the same way they're going to bring them, and the court are going to bring, all the tribes bring, whatever it's going to be. But that offering that's brought, that when a congregation commits a avera inadvertently based off an erroneous ruling, the Kohen Gadol will be included in that atonement. Okay. She'ein bezdin chayav ad sheyoru levata mitzvahs ulekayim mitzvahs l'chein Mashiach. Now, the Mishnah is saying, since the Kohen Gadol himself, we're going to see, is compared, right now we're going to express that he's compared to the court in a number of ways, as we're about to explain in a second. Therefore, when he and the court rule erroneously and the people follow, so he will also get atonement like everybody else. How do you know that he's similar to the court? We learned that the court is only liable when their ruling is about something, a part of a matter, not a complete matter, not a complete removal, right? Ain Shabbos b'Torah, ain Nida b'Torah, not one of those cases. Rather, a case where you're removing part of the mitzvah from the Torah. V'chein Mashiach. So to a Kohen Gadol, he's only liable for issuing a ruling about the removal of a certain mitzvah or whatever. And also the court, when it comes to avodos kochavim, idol worship, they're only going to be liable to get atonement if they remove not the entire idol worship from the Torah, rather they remove part of it. This kind of bowing is permitted. Yeah. Okay, so now, how do you know that this is true, that when he rules and acts on his own, he gets his own atonement, and when he rules with the court, he gets atonement with them? How do I know this is true? So you would have thought that maybe when he ruled with the congregation, meaning he ruled with the court, and the congregation acted upon that erroneous ruling, you would think that maybe he brings his own bull, and he's not included in those other offerings. He's not included in that offering that gets atonements for the whole nation and for the court. He has to bring his own bull. V'dinhu is very logical. Nasi motzi michal yachid. A king is removed from, he has his own laws when it comes to what animal he brings for his sin offering. Mashiach motzi michal yachid. And a Kohen Gadol also has his own laws of what kind of animal he brings. So, Manasi chata b'fnei atzmo, maybe b'fnei atzmo. Chata imat tzibur mischaper lo imat tzibur. Just like a king, when he sins, on his own, he brings his own sin offering. And when he sins with the people, so mischaper lo imat tzibur, he gets atonement with the people. Haf Mashiach chata b'fnei atzmo, maybe b'fnei atzmo, chata imat tzibur. Mischaper lo imat tzibur. So to a Kohen Gadol, he'll be very similar, just like when he acts inadvertently after his own erroneous ruling, he'll have to bring his own offering. So too, when he acts erroneously with the rest of the congregation, he'll be included in their offering. Says the Gemara, not so fast. Lo, imamart ben nasi shekem mischaper lo imat tzibur b'yom kippurim. Tomer b'mashiach she'em mischaper lo imat tzibur b'yom kippurim. If you look in the beginning of Shavuos, so the Kohen Gadol is going to bring his own sacrifice, atoning for his own things on Yom Kippur. He has his own atonement to atone for on Yom Kippur. And that's not included with the rest of the congregation. A king is included. Whatever we get atoned for on Yom Kippur, the king is included in that. There's no special sacrifice for the king. So you want to compare a Kohen Gadol to a king, but they're not comparable. On Yom Kippur, you see a difference. So, so since the Kohen Gadol gets his own atonement on Yom Kippur, you would thought maybe he always has to have his own atonement. Even when he sins with the rest of the people, he goes to the J with everybody and eats that forbidden fat that everyone thought was permitted. Talmud Lomar al chataso asher chata. He only has to bring his own offering for his own aveira. So for his own aveira, he brings his own offering. But for an aveira that he does with everybody else, he brings with everybody else. So haketzad, let's see what this means. What's the case? Just like we just said, when he sins on his own, he brings his own offering. When he sins with everybody else, so then he brings an offering for everybody else. So on the one hand, the verse says he brings his own offering. That's referring to him doing his own private aveira after his own erroneous ruling. On the other hand, he can be compared to the king who is included with the nation when the most of the nation sins. Okay. Heikidami. So what's this case where he's ruling with the court? Really the case of our Mishnah. So Ilema Huda Mufla Vehem Einan Muflin, if he's the, I don't know a good word for mufla. This is the same word in this week's parsha, Kini Fleisehi. There it means like it's concealed from you. Here it means that's like it's used also as a wonderment. Meaning it's talking about somebody who's very much removed in terms of his knowledge. He's on a different plane. You meet people that are a little smarter than you, and then you meet people that are like, wow. Right, they're on a different playing field. That's like, I don't know that one word for mufla, but that's the idea of mufla at least. So the who mufla, he's the top. So if you tell me he's an expert, the haim einan muflayin, and they don't really know their stuff so well then pshita obviously the mischaper lo, because horan de lahon below klum. Ubayi lasuya kispa oseira kol chad v'chad. We learned earlier that if they are not so knowledgeable and they do not discuss this with the most knowledgeable person there, so then they're not going to be able to bring atonement. That's going to be when now the congregation acts based off of that ruling. So then everyone brings like their own private sin offering, a female goat or a female sheep, because if the court doesn't speak it out with the top guy in town before issuing a ruling, that's already much more like advertent than it is inadvertent. Now, maybe you'll say it's the flip side, the inan mufla and hulav mufla. We're trying to find a case where both of them are ruling something. So if they're the experts and he's not an expert, so amay mischaper lo b'fnei atzmo, hahara didei v'lav klumhi. It's interesting. The Gemara assumes that since he doesn't really know what he's talking about, that's not considered really a ruling. That's not really a ruling. Yeah, it's not considered a proper ruling. So what must be the case? Amarav Papa, I'm turning the page. Kegon shahayu muflin shneim. They both are, so to speak, very, very knowledgeable. And Kegon shahayu muflin shneim. Yeah, they're both very knowledgeable. He's an expert. They're experts. Therefore, both of their rulings are valid. And even though he rules and they're ruling and they're both good rulings, he still has to bring his own atonement. Since the first case in our mission, they ruled about two separate things. They ruled about the forbidden fats, and he ruled about idol worship. So at the end of the day, it's a good ruling, and he has to bring his own sacrifice. The second case of the Mishnah, where he ruled with everybody else, they're both ruling about the same thing, and there the novelty is that even though he ruled also, so someone came to him about the forbidden fat, and he said it's permitted, and they came to the court and they said it's permitted, he still can get atonement with everybody else and not bring his own offering. Okay. So Abaye says, so Savar Abaye, a little bit interesting logic, which Rabba's going to disagree with. Savar Abaye lemeimar What's the case in our Mishnah where he does his own Aveira, he rules and does his own Aveira? Heichidami, what's the case? The Yasi b'shnei mekomos, v'kamoru b'trei isure. They're sitting in two different places. The Kohen Gadol in one place and the Bezdin in another place, and they each issued a ruling, but about a separate Aveira, about a separate prohibition. Sorry, Kohen Gadol was about, let's say, idol worship, and the Bezdin and the court was about Chelev. And that's the case in our Mishnah. Amalei Rava, but being in two different places, what does that do for you? Atu shnei mekomos gormin, being in a different place would cause someone to get their own atonement, or would cause, what does that mean? Ella, even they're sitting right next to each other, right? They're sharing an office. The cave and the kamoru betrays her. The point is that they ruled about two separate prohibitions. Him about forbidden fats, and they about forbidden fats, and him about idol worship, or they about idol worship, and him about forbidden fats. So they each issued a ruling about something else. They have ruled that bowing down in this fashion is permitted, and he ruled that the forbidden fat is permitted. The rule is that at the end of the day, when he does an Aveira, when he follows through with that ruling, so he has to bring his own atonement. It's hard to understand exactly, like, what would you have thought if it's a ruling about two separate prohibitions? Why would you have thought that the Kohen Gadol does not bring his own atonement? Why would you ever think he'd be included? If he ruled forbidden fats are permitted, and the Bezdin ruled that idol worship in this form is going to be permitted, and then the congregation follows through, and he follows through on his act, why would you have thought that he would be atoned with them? He has to bring atonement for a separate Aveira. I'm not exactly sure what the novelty in that is. The second case of the Mishnah is a big novelty, that they both ruled, Reuben comes to Kohen Gadol, forbidden fat is mutter, and Shimon goes to the Bezdin, and forbidden fat, they say it's mutter, it's permitted, and then most of the congregation follows. You could have thought that Kohen Gadol should really bring his own sacrifice. To that we say no, he's included with everybody else. Okay, so, you know what? I think that's the Gemara's next question. Okay, that's funny. Okay, so Pshita, hu bechelev heinu los lechavim, chativ b'fnei atzmo, hu the ha chalukim b'taymayu. Okay, good. So it's good when you forget things fast. It makes it exciting the second time around, So the Gemara says that case is obvious. Those cases, there are different reasons. One's avodas kochavim, idol worship. One is fat v'chalukein b'karbanos, and you even bring different sacrifices. Idol worship gets its own sacrifice, and forbidden fat gets its own sacrifice. So that case is obvious. What's the case that's less obvious is Tehu bepar vehein bepar v'seir. He rules about fats. So he brings a bull. They ruled about idol worship. They need to bring a bull and a goat. They're bringing a goat, so that's obvious, right? That for sure that there's different atonements because you have different sacrifices. He can't be included with them. They're bringing a goat. He's not bringing a goat. The kol shekain, if we go the other way, that he rules that this kind of form of idol worship is permitted. The kol shekain erroneously. The kol shekain hu b'avodas kochavim behein b'chelev. For sure, you go the other way, that now he has to bring two sacrifices, and they bring one sacrifice. For sure, he can't be included in their atonement because he has to bring another sacrifice. The chalukein b'korban hasein legamrei, totally different sacrifices. So that is obvius. The hu seira in hupar, he has to bring the goat, and they have to bring the bull. So Ella, okay, good. So here is the case in the Mishnah, and this is So Ella, they are both ruling about forbidden fats. However, there are different forbidden fats. One covers the innards, and one covers the hu bechelev amachatz is a carib that covers the innards. The hein bechelev shaladakin. What was the dakin again? The dakin was the stomach. No. What was the dakin? The dakin was another part of the animal.
Intestines.
The intestines?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. So one is the forbidden fat about the stomach, and one's a forbidden fat on the intestines. So there you could hear that maybe if they both ruled erroneously about that, there at least you could hear that maybe he should be included in their atonement because it's really the same thing. So Elo hu b'chelev ha'machasas ha'kerev v'hein b'chelev sh'aladakin mahu. So that our Mishnah was ruling about those previous cases where it's two different averas, and it was obvious. But now the Gemara is asking, is this also included in our Mishnah about two separate fats? So they bring the same sacrifice, but cave in the betrayed cry also. Since there are two different verses in the Torah that prohibit these two different fats, so that it's like having two different reasons. It's similar to like idol worship and forbidden fats. It's not fully similar, but in a certain way, maybe it's two distinct prohibitions, and he would also not be included with their atonement. He would have to bring his own atonement. Oh, Dilma, no. Shem chelev echadhu. It's called chelev. Chelev is one, and since chelev is one, he would be included in their atonement. That's a question. And imtim salomar, if you want to tell me shem chelev echadhu, that chelev is one, and therefore he would be included in their atonement, even though he himself ruled erroneously and acted erroneously. But since they also ruled erroneously and the congregation followed them, he would get atonement with them. That's by chelev. But what about hu b'chelev v'hein b'dam? He ruled that this forbidden fat is permitted, and they, the court, ruled that a certain blood is permitted. Mahu. Do you say, listen, one's blood and one's fat? Obviously, they're different. Or do you say, listen, but you bring the same offering for both? So maybe you follow the atonement and not the sin. And since the atonement is the same, you could be included in the atonement. That the Gemara says, teku. That is unresolved. Okay. Now, we said that the things that we really knew already, and that's really what the Gemara is going to say. The Mishnah mentioned that a court is only liable when they rule on part of a matter, not on a complete matter. They're only liable when the congregation follows them, when it was about a partial matter, not about a complete matter. So it says the Gemara, this we know already. Like we said in the first chapter, it says when the matter was forgotten from you. So it says a matter and not the entire matter, right? We had that mem. The Gemara said the nelam, the mem at the end of the word nelam also gets expounded to the beginning of the word davar. And I think we had two other sources also for that ruling. But yeah, so that's how you know that it has to be a partial matter, not a complete matter. Now it says v'chein hamashiach. So too the Kohen Gadol is bound by the same rules. It's only if he erroneously ruled about a part of a matter, not about a complete matter. Minalan desiv la'ashmas ha'am harei mashiach kitzibur. That it says that he's compared to the nation. His guilt is like the nation, is like the nations. Harei mashiach kitzibur. He's like the nation in terms of that they both are only going to be liable. They only get atonement. They only get atonement if they ruled erroneously and followed through on a partial matter and not on a complete matter. However, below b'avodos kachavim, so too by idol worship, it's only a partial matter, not a complete matter. Minalan taner rabbanon, the fishi yatsa avodos kachavim ladun be'atzmo. Avodos kachavim had its own rules and regulations. So you would have thought yachol yechayav ala kiras mitzvahs kula. Therefore, since it has its own rules and regulations that you bring your own sacrifices for it, you would think it's only when you uproot it completely. The word me'eni from the eyes is the same in both places, and just like there it's referring to the court, so too here by idol worship it's referring to the court also. Afkanami bebezdin umalaholan, just like over there it's davar below kolaguf. Just like by a regular case, you're only liable for a partial matter. Afkanami davar below kolaguf. So to here, it's only on a partial matter and not a complete matter. Okay. Next Mishnah. Ein chayavin al helem davar im shigas hamaisa. Ein chayavin ella al helam davar im shigas maisa. V'chein Mashiach. Okay, a little bit of a review is that the court is only liable when they had a helam davar, a lapse, meaning they erroneously ruled something, and they had an erroneous act, being that the congregation followed them. V'chein Mashiach, he has to erroneously rule and then act afterwards upon his erroneous ruling. Below ba'avodas chachavim, ein chayavin ella al helam davar im shigas maisa. So as opposed to, one second. The lob avodas chachavim ein chayavin ella al helam davar im shigas maisa. I guess we'll see what that means more, but it's out right by the word below is throwing me off. Unless they fix it.
Says nor is the court liable to an offering in the case of idolatry.
Yeah, they take out the word ein chayavin, meaning it's below avodas chachavim ella al helam davar im shigas maisa. So too, meaning you're not liable until. It's like a double negative, right? You're not liable until. It's like a double negative. So you're only liable also when there is a erroneous ruling followed by an action. Yeah, they take out the words ein chayavin. Yeah. So okay, minalan. How do I know this is true? The Tana Rabbanan Yishku, that they made a mistake erroneously, a shogeg, an inadvertent act. Yachol yu chayavin al shigas maisa. Talmud lomer yishku v'nelam davar. Ein chayavin ella al helam davar im shigas maisa. That you would have thought that they're liable just for acting erroneously. To which we say no, you have to rule erroneously and have an act that follows erroneously, and only then you're going to be liable. V'chein hamashiach, so to a kohen gadol. Minalan ditziv la'ashmas ha'am, harei mashiach kitzibur. The kohen gadol is compared to the nation. La'ashmas ha'am, he's compared to the nation, that he also has to act upon his erroneous ruling. So too by idol worship, it's only when you had an erroneous ruling followed by a erroneous act, an inadvertent act. Sorry. Since idol worship has its own rules and regulations, it's singled out to be judged in its own section. You bring different sacrifices. You would have thought that you're only liable if just the act was done inadvertently without an erroneous ruling. Namar kan me'enim, namar laholam me'enim, alaholam chayavin ela alhelam davar im shigas maisa, afkan and chayavin ela alhelam davar im shigas maisa. So just like it says the word me'ene from the eyes, we learn that just by a regular case of the court, you have to issue an erroneous ruling and then act erroneously upon that. So too, when it comes to avodas chachavim, idol worship, the same rules will be true. You have to rule erroneously and act erroneously. The ilu Mashiach ba'avodas chachavim lo katani masnisim. Interesting. It doesn't mention the words v'chein Mashiach in our Mishnah, meaning it rules that by regular case you have to have an erroneous ruling followed by a act. There it says v'chein Mashiach. So too for the Kohen Gadol. Then when it talks about idol worship, it just says for idol worship you have to have an erroneous ruling followed by inadvertent act, and it doesn't say, and so too by the Kohen Gadol. So it sounds like if the Kohen Gadol, for the Kohen Gadol, when it comes to idol worship, you don't have to have an erroneous ruling followed by an inadvertent act. Maybe just an inadvertent act will get you a atonement like a regular sin offering. So the Gemara says, Mani Rebbe, this would follow, if that's true, if our implication is correct, it would be the opinion of Rebbe, the Tanya Mashiach avodas chachavim, when it comes to Kohen Gadol, who does an inadvertent form of idol worship, he does idol worship inadvertently. He didn't realize that bowing down to touch your toes, and in front of the idol is how they worship the idol. So he bowed down to touch his toes, and therefore now he's going to be liable. Rabbi Omer b'shigas ma'isa, as long as he does it inadvertently, so then he will be granted atonement. The Chachamim Omrim, no, the Helam Davar, the Shavin, Shabisiira, V'shavin she'ein maybe asham tolu. The Chachamim say that behelem davar, that you have to have an erroneous ruling first, and then you have to act upon it. V'shavin she'b'seira, and he's similar. The Kohen Gadol is similar. Yeah, and they both agree. The Shavin should be that he has to bring a female goat. The Shavin, then they both agree. I guess both is Rabbi and the Chachamim. Shavin shebisira is biyachid, they added, meaning they both agree that a regular person who does something inadvertently has to bring the female goat, and they both agree that the Shavin she'ein maybe asham talui, that the Kohen Gadol is not going to bring the asham talui. Okay, I think we'll stop here. Yeah. Enjoy your Rockaway Beach, Baltimore, and